The life you thought was yours can be taken in an instant. Charlotte had always known that her future was already written. From the day she was born, her family promised her hand in marriage to Duke William Ashford. It was a promise that carried weight, a future sealed by tradition and duty. As she grew older, she found herself walking beside William, talking about the future they would share, laughing together, and dreaming of a life of love and partnership. But that was before. The night before their wedding, everything changed. Charlotte stood by the window of her room, staring out at the night sky, her heart racing. Tomorrow, she would be the Duchess. Tomorrow, she would belong to William, and William would belong to her. It was a dream come true, wasn't it? But something felt off. There was a strange tension in the air, one she couldn't ignore. She thought about her sister, Evelyn, the younger, more carefree one, who always seemed to steal the spotlight with her laughter and charm. Charlotte smiled bitterly. She had always been the responsible one, the one who followed the rules, the one who did what was expected. Was she even sure she loved William? As much as she tried to shake the thought, it lingered in the back of her mind. The next morning, the day of the wedding, everything was set. The church was adorned with flowers, the guests were arriving, and the air was thick with excitement. But as Charlotte walked down the aisle, she noticed something was wrong. William's face was not the one she remembered. It was distant, cold, like he was already somewhere else. Her heart pounded in her chest as she reached the altar, her gaze meeting his, hoping for the warmth and love that she had always felt between them. Instead, he turned away. The words came out of his mouth like a sharp knife cutting through her chest. "I cannot marry you, Charlotte." The room fell into stunned silence. Her knees nearly buckled beneath her, but she held herself upright, her vision blurry with tears. "What do you mean?" she whispered, barely able to breathe. "I'm sorry, Charlotte," William said, his voice low and apologetic, "but I can't marry you. I'm in love with Evelyn." The words echoed in her ears, and Charlotte felt the weight of betrayal press down on her chest. Her sister, her own sister. She turned to look at Evelyn, who stood frozen, guilt and fear written all over her face. Evelyn didn't know what to do. She didn't know how to make it better. And Charlotte's heart shattered, but not in the way she expected. Instead of collapsing into tears, she stood tall, feeling the burning rage and sadness boil inside her. Without a word, she turned on her heel and walked out of the church, the sound of her footsteps the only thing that echoed in the silence behind her. This was not how her story was supposed to go. But as Charlotte stepped into the unknown, she realized that maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of her real journey. Charlotte didn't look back as she stepped out of the church. The soft sound of her heels against the cobblestone street was the only thing she could hear, her mind a whirlwind of shock and disbelief. She hadn't expected it. No one had. The life she had imagined, the future she had been promised, was now slipping away from her like sand through her fingers. Her breath came in shallow bursts, and for the first time in her life, Charlotte didn't know what to do next. She could feel the eyes of the guests on her, but she didn't care. She didn't care about anything except the way her heart was breaking. Her mind raced, replaying the words William had spoken over and over. "I'm in love with Evelyn." The pain in her chest deepened with every repetition. How had it come to this? She walked aimlessly through the streets of the town, not knowing where she was going, only wanting to escape the suffocating reality that had been forced upon her. Her wedding dress felt heavy, like it was a symbol of the life she had been meant to live, a life that was no longer hers. As the sun began to set, casting a golden hue over everything, Charlotte found herself at the edge of the forest. She paused for a moment, gazing into the trees. She had spent so much of her life doing what others expected, following the rules, living up to the promises made for her. But now, in this moment of devastation, she realized something. She was free. Free to make her own choices. Free to live her own life. Charlotte took a deep breath and stepped into the woods. It wasn't that she wanted to run away, but she needed space. Time to think. Time to process the flood of emotions that had consumed her. She didn't know what would come next. All she knew was that she couldn't stay in that town, not with the people who knew her as the woman who was supposed to marry Duke William. As she walked deeper into the forest, the sounds of the world faded away, and she felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't the peace of being content with what she had, but the peace of knowing that she no longer had to conform to anyone's expectations. She was her own person, and no one could take that away from her. The night air grew cooler, and Charlotte sat on a fallen log, letting the silence surround her. She let the tears come, finally allowing herself to feel the full weight of what had happened. She cried for the future she had lost, for the love that had never been hers, for the betrayal of both William and Evelyn. But as the tears subsided, Charlotte felt something else. A flicker of determination, a quiet voice within her saying that this was not the end. She wasn't going to let this define her. She was going to find her own way. Tomorrow was a new day, and for the first time in her life, Charlotte felt the thrill of possibility. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew she would get there on her own terms. Charlotte wandered deeper into the forest, the weight of her wedding dress pulling at her as she moved through the thick undergrowth. Her heart still ached, but the fresh air seemed to ease the tightness in her chest, each step feeling like a small release. She had no destination, no plan. It was as if the world had shifted beneath her feet, and all that was left to do was find her own footing. The sun was low, the sky painted with shades of orange and purple. For a moment, she felt a strange sense of calm. The world was moving on, and she could either stand still or find a new path. It had been hours since she left the church, but the thought of returning felt unbearable. She could never face the people who had watched her be abandoned at the altar. She couldn't face Evelyn, the sister who had taken her place in a way that was both inevitable and devastating. Charlotte knew she needed to leave. She had to find a place where she could heal, where she could figure out who she really was without the expectations of her family, without the shadow of William's broken promises. She had never allowed herself to consider what life would be like without him, without the future they had been promised. But now, in this moment of loss, Charlotte felt a spark of something new, freedom. A freedom she didn't know she had been longing for. As the sky darkened and the first stars began to appear, Charlotte stumbled upon a small cabin nestled at the edge of the woods. It was a simple structure, unremarkable in its appearance, but something about it called to her. She hesitated for only a moment before walking up to the door. Her knock was soft, but the door opened almost immediately, revealing a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a weathered face. "Can I help you, dear?" the woman asked, her voice warm and inviting. Charlotte wasn't sure what to say at first. She had no plan, no reason for being here other than the need to escape, to be somewhere safe. "I'm lost," Charlotte said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not physically," she added quickly, "but emotionally. I just need a place to stay for a while." The woman studied her for a moment, as if weighing something unseen, then nodded. "Come in," she said gently. "I have a room. It's not much, but it's yours for as long as you need." Charlotte stepped inside, grateful for the kindness of a stranger. The cabin was small but cozy, filled with the earthy smell of wood and herbs. The woman led her to a simple room with a bed and a small fireplace. "Thank you," Charlotte said quietly, her voice trembling. The woman smiled. "No need to thank me. Rest. You've been through something, haven't you?" Charlotte nodded, tears threatening to spill once more. She hadn't realized how exhausted she was, physically and emotionally. The weight of the past few hours had drained her, and now, in the quiet of the cabin, she allowed herself to collapse onto the bed. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she felt a sense of peace. Tomorrow would come, and she had no idea what it would bring, but for now, she would rest. For the first time in her life, Charlotte wasn't bound by anyone's expectations but her own. Charlotte woke to the soft crackling of the fireplace, the warmth of the flames making the room feel even more inviting. For a brief moment, she forgot where she was, lost in the fog of sleep. But as her eyes fluttered open, reality rushed back in. The events of yesterday, William's betrayal, Evelyn's silent guilt, the shattering of everything she thought was her life, flooded her mind. Her chest tightened, but it wasn't as painful as it had been. The tears she had shed last night had somehow lightened the weight in her heart, though the hurt still lingered. She sat up, the soft quilt rustling as she did. The room was small but comfortable, the wooden beams of the cabin sealing a reminder of the simplicity and peace she had found here. She hadn't expected to wake up feeling calm. But here, in this place, far away from the expectations of her family, Far away from the life she was supposed to lead, Charlotte felt something she hadn't felt in years: freedom. She stood up, stretching her arms toward the ceiling, taking in the quiet of the cabin. The world outside was still. No rushing, no demands, no looming future. Just silence. Charlotte crossed the room to the small window and looked outside. The forest stood still, bathed in the soft light of the morning sun. The air smelled of pine and earth, and for the first time in a long while, Charlotte felt like she could breathe deeply, fully. She was no longer just the daughter of the Harrington family, no longer just the fiancée of Duke William. She was Charlotte. Just Charlotte. A part of her wondered what would have happened if she had stayed. If she had gone through with the wedding, played the part she was supposed to. Would things have turned out differently? Would she have been happy? But the thought was fleeting. She knew she couldn't go back. Not now. As much as it hurt, she had to move forward. She had to find her own way. Charlotte turned away from the window and made her way to the small table by the door. There, she found a simple breakfast, a bowl of fruit and a mug of tea. The woman who had offered her shelter must have prepared it. Charlotte sat down and ate in silence, the warmth of the food filling her as she gathered her thoughts. She had no idea where her journey would take her next. She didn't know what kind of future she wanted, but for the first time in her life, that uncertainty didn't scare her. It felt like a challenge, something she could face on her own terms. After breakfast, Charlotte stood and made her way outside, the fresh air immediately refreshing her. The woman had mentioned that there was a town a few miles away, where she could find a place to stay if she needed it. But for now, she was content to be here, to find solace in the simplicity of the forest, to reconnect with herself. She took a deep breath, feeling the crisp morning air fill her lungs. Maybe it was time for a new beginning. As she walked deeper into the woods, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known was possible. The trees stretched tall above her, their leaves rustling in the breeze. Everything felt alive, and Charlotte felt as though she, too, was awakening. The journey ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Charlotte felt like she was in control of her own story. Charlotte walked deeper into the forest, the earthy scent of pine and damp leaves filling her lungs. The quiet was almost deafening in its peacefulness. Each step a reminder of the distance she had put between herself and everything she thought she knew. She didn't know how long she had been walking, but she didn't care. Time didn't matter here. For the first time in her life, Charlotte felt like she could be whoever she wanted to be, without the weight of expectation, without the fear of disappointing anyone. She felt free. The branches above her swayed gently in the breeze, their leaves rustling like a soft whisper. Charlotte smiled, letting the sound calm her. The world was still, the only movement around her being the occasional flutter of a bird's wings or the scurrying of a squirrel in the underbrush. The simplicity of it all felt comforting. She wasn't running away anymore. She was simply living. As she walked, Charlotte thought about everything that had brought her to this point. William's betrayal, Evelyn's guilt, the life she had been promised, it had all led her here. But even with all the pain, she knew it was for the best. She had been holding on to a future that wasn't hers to begin with, and now, she was free to choose her own path. She wasn't sure what that future looked like yet, but for the first time, that uncertainty didn't scare her. It felt like a blank page, ready to be filled with whatever she decided. Charlotte paused for a moment to sit on a large rock, her fingers tracing the rough surface as she thought about her next steps. She didn't have a plan, not really, but she knew she needed to find a way to support herself. The woman who had taken her in the night before had been kind, but Charlotte couldn't stay there forever. She needed to stand on her own 2 feet. As she sat there, lost in thought, the sound of footsteps interrupted her reverie. Charlotte looked up to see a figure approaching through the trees. A man, dressed in simple clothes, carrying a basket. His appearance wasn't imposing, but his presence felt different, calm and grounded. He smiled as he reached her, his eyes warm. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," he said, his voice soft but clear. "I was on my way to gather some herbs and saw you sitting here. Are you all right?" Charlotte hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to respond. She hadn't expected to encounter anyone in the middle of the forest. "I'm fine," she said finally, offering a small smile. "Just thinking." The man nodded, his expression understanding. "It's a good place for that," he said, sitting down beside her without asking. "The forest has a way of helping you sort through things." Charlotte couldn't help but agree. The man didn't press her for details, but the quiet companionship of his presence was comforting. They sat together for a while, listening to the sounds of the forest, neither of them speaking. Charlotte didn't feel the need to fill the silence. It was enough to just be there, in this moment. After a time, the man stood and motioned to his basket. "I'll be on my way," he said. "But if you ever need help or just someone to talk to, don't hesitate to come by. My cabin isn't far from here." Charlotte nodded, grateful for his kindness. "Thank you," she said softly. As he walked away, Charlotte stayed seated on the rock, watching him disappear into the trees. She felt a sense of peace settle over her. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she could face it, whatever it was. She wasn't alone anymore. The world was still hers to explore. The days passed quietly for Charlotte, each one blending into the next. She had found a rhythm in the solitude of the forest, walking through the trees, breathing in the fresh air, and finding comfort in the simplicity of her new life. She spent her mornings gathering herbs and wildflowers, her afternoons sitting by the small stream that wound through the woods, and her evenings reading the books the kind woman had offered her. There was no pressure, no expectations, and for the first time in a long time, Charlotte felt a sense of peace she hadn't realized she was missing. One afternoon, as she sat on a rock by the stream, Charlotte thought back to the life she had left behind. William's face still haunted her dreams, but it was fading slowly, like a distant memory she was finally able to let go of. She wondered about Evelyn, about how the family was coping with the scandal of the broken engagement. But she didn't feel anger anymore, only sadness, mixed with the knowledge that she couldn't keep holding on to a past that no longer belonged to her. She had to move forward. But the question was, where to? She had no clear answer, and that was okay. She didn't need to have it all figured out. Not yet. The forest was her refuge now, and it was enough. One evening, as the sun set behind the trees, Charlotte decided to visit the man she had met a few days earlier. She remembered his offer. His cabin wasn't far, and she hadn't seen anyone in days. There was a strange comfort in knowing someone else was nearby, even if only in passing. As she walked toward his cabin, she couldn't help but feel a sense of curiosity. Who was he? What had brought him to this quiet life in the woods? She didn't know, but she was beginning to realize that meeting him had been another small step in her journey, one that had opened her up to the possibility of connection again. When she arrived at his cabin, the man was outside, tending to a small garden near the entrance. He looked up when he saw her and smiled warmly. "Charlotte," he greeted her, setting down his tools. "I'm glad to see you. I hope I'm not interrupting," she said, offering a shy smile in return. "Not at all," he replied, gesturing toward a nearby bench. "Come sit. It's been quiet around here lately. It's nice to have some company." Charlotte sat beside him, feeling a sense of comfort in the easy, casual conversation that followed. They talked about everything and nothing, the silence between their words as natural as the rustling of leaves in the wind. He didn't ask her about her past, and she didn't feel the need to explain. For the first time since she had left, she felt like she could simply exist without the weight of her past dragging her down. As the evening wore on, the man offered her a warm cup of tea, and they sat together, watching the sun dip below the horizon. It wasn't the grand reunion she had once dreamed of, but it felt real, and it felt right. Charlotte realized, in that moment, that she didn't need a perfect ending. She didn't need a grand love story or a life that was neatly wrapped up with a bow. She only needed to live, to take each day as it came, and to embrace the simple moments that made life worth living. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Weeks passed, and Charlotte settled into a peaceful rhythm she hadn't thought possible. The days blurred together in a comforting way, each one offering a bit more clarity than the last. The man, whose name she had learned was Samuel, had become a quiet presence in her life, offering companionship without asking for anything in return. He never pressed her to talk about her past, and Charlotte was grateful for that. It allowed her the space to heal, to reclaim the parts of herself that had been lost. Samuel wasn't someone who sought attention. He had a way of making even the most mundane activities feel important. Whether it was tending to his small garden or gathering firewood, he did it with care, as if each task was a way of honoring the land he had chosen to live on. And in his silence, Charlotte found peace. There was a comfort in knowing that someone else could share space with her without feeling the need for constant conversation. One morning, as Charlotte was walking through the woods, she thought about the world beyond the forest. The life she had left behind seemed distant now, like a dream that had lost its clarity. She had imagined, for so long, that her future had been laid out before her, but now she realized that the possibilities were endless. She wasn't bound by promises made long ago, or by the expectations of a family that no longer had a hold on her. She was free to choose. As she walked along the familiar path toward Samuel's cabin, Charlotte felt a spark of something. Maybe it was hope, or maybe it was just the knowledge that she could start again. She had been running from the pain for so long, but now she realized that it wasn't about running at all. It was about moving forward, slowly, carefully, on her own terms. She reached the cabin and found Samuel sitting on the porch, sipping tea and watching the birds flit between the trees. He looked up as she approached, his smile warm but not demanding. "Good morning," he said, his voice calm. "Morning," Charlotte replied, sitting down beside him. She felt a shift inside her, a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. They didn't talk for a while, the two of them simply sitting in the peaceful silence, watching the world around them. But something inside Charlotte stirred, a feeling she hadn't expected. She wasn't sure what it was yet. Maybe it was a new beginning, or maybe it was just the recognition that she was no longer afraid of what the future might hold. For the first time in a long while, she felt at peace with the uncertainty of it all. The forest had given her the time and space to heal, but it also gave her something else, the chance to rediscover herself. And as she sat there, beside Samuel, watching the sun rise higher in the sky, Charlotte realized that she no longer needed to hide. She could face whatever came next, with or without the answers she had once thought she needed. In that moment, the future seemed wide open, full of possibilities, and for the first time, Charlotte felt ready to embrace it. The days slowly turned into weeks, and Charlotte's life in the forest began to feel more like a quiet chapter in a book she had once forgotten. She still spent time with Samuel, but it wasn't out of necessity. They had settled into a comfortable rhythm, where words didn't always need to be spoken to fill the spaces between them. One morning, as Charlotte sat on the porch of Samuel's cabin, sipping tea and watching the sunlight break through the trees, a thought crossed her mind. It was time for her to take the next step. The life she had been living had given her peace, but she knew she couldn't stay in this bubble forever. There was a whole world beyond the forest, a world that was waiting for her to rediscover it. She wasn't sure what she wanted yet, but she knew it was out there, somewhere, just beyond the horizon. Samuel sat beside her, as calm and steady as ever. He didn't say anything right away, sensing that Charlotte was deep in thought. The quiet between them had always been comfortable, like two people content to share the same space without the need to fill it with conversation. Charlotte finally turned to him. "Samuel," she began, her voice soft but certain, "I think it's time for me to leave." He looked at her, his eyes thoughtful, as though he had been expecting this moment, but he didn't try to stop her. "Where will you go?" he asked gently, his tone neither pushy nor dismissive. Charlotte paused, considering the question. "I'm not sure yet, but I think it's time for me to find my own way. I've spent so much time hiding, so much time running from everything that happened. But now, I think I can face it. I can face the world outside." Samuel nodded slowly. "You've grown strong, Charlotte. I can see it in you." His words were simple, but they carried weight, as if he understood that her journey was just beginning, not ending. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. "For everything." He smiled, the same warm, kind smile he had given her from the moment they met. "You don't need to thank me. I'm glad to have had the chance to help you find yourself again." The air around them seemed to grow heavier as Charlotte stood, feeling a sense of finality in the motion. The forest had been her refuge, her place of healing, but it was no longer enough. She had learned what she needed to hear, and now it was time to move forward, to take the lessons she had learned and apply them to the world outside. She had nothing left to fear. As she gathered her things and prepared to leave, Charlotte felt a strange calmness settle over her. The uncertainty that had once paralyzed her was now replaced by a quiet confidence. She didn't know what the future held, but she was ready to face it. Samuel stood as well, watching her with a look that was both proud and wistful. "You'll do great things, Charlotte," he said softly, his voice filled with quiet encouragement. You've already started. Charlotte smiled at him, a genuine smile that came from deep within. Thank you, Samuel. I'll never forget this place, or you. With that, Charlotte turned and walked away from the cabin, the soft crunch of leaves underfoot the only sound she could hear. The forest, which had been her sanctuary, faded into the distance behind her, and ahead, the world stretched out, wide, unknown, and full of possibilities. She was ready for whatever came next. Charlotte walked away from the cabin with a steady pace, her steps echoing in the quiet morning air. The world before her was vast, a canvas yet to be painted with the choices she would make. Her heart no longer carried the heavy burden it once did. The weight of past promises and unspoken expectations now replaced with the freedom to choose her own path. As she walked through the forest, the trees seemed to bow with a silent acknowledgement of her journey. She had left the sanctuary of Samuel's cabin behind, but the lessons it offered would stay with her. She had learned that peace wasn't something to seek. It was something to be allowed, something to be accepted when it arrived. And peace had come, slowly, steadily. Now, Charlotte was ready for what lay beyond. The town was not far from where she stood, a quiet settlement that had been mentioned by Samuel in passing. The idea of it was comforting. It wasn't a bustling city filled with noise and chaos, but a simple, calm place where people lived and worked, where life had a slower rhythm. The thought of blending into a community, of becoming part of something without the pressure of expectations, felt like the perfect next step. Charlotte arrived in the town just as the sun was beginning to set. The streets were quiet, the buildings standing tall and solid against the fading light. It was small, but there was something welcoming about it, the kind of place where strangers could start anew without questions, where the past didn't follow them like a shadow. She walked into the heart of the town, her eyes scanning the surroundings, feeling both nervous and excited. She didn't know exactly what she was looking for, but she trusted that she would know it when she found it. The town square was lined with small shops, the windows filled with simple goods, bread, vegetables, handmade crafts. The scent of freshly baked bread lingered in the air, reminding her of the comfort she hadn't realized she'd missed. As Charlotte wandered through the square, she stopped in front of a small inn, its sign swaying gently in the breeze. The warmth inside seemed to beckon her, and without thinking, she pushed the door open. A soft bell chimed as she entered, and the woman behind the counter looked up, her face friendly and welcoming. "Good evening," the woman said, her voice calm and inviting. "How can I help you?" Charlotte hesitated, unsure of her next words. She hadn't planned on stopping here, but something about the inn felt right. "I'm looking for a place to stay," she said finally, her voice steady but soft. The woman smiled and nodded. "We have a room available. Would you like to stay the night?" Charlotte nodded. "Yes, that would be perfect." The woman handed her a key, and Charlotte followed her up the stairs to a small, cozy room. The bed was simple, but the room was warm and inviting. As Charlotte sat on the edge of the bed, she realized that she was exactly where she needed to be. For the first time in a long time, she felt at ease with the world around her. There was no pressure, no expectations, just the quiet hum of life moving forward. Charlotte didn't know what the next day would bring, or what her future looked like. But for now, she was content to simply be here, to rest and breathe, and to allow herself the space to begin again. The following morning, Charlotte woke to the soft light filtering through the window, the sounds of the town beginning to stir. She stretched, feeling the warmth of the blanket around her, and for a moment, she allowed herself to stay still, savoring the comfort of this new chapter. It wasn't much, this small room in a quiet town, but it was hers. And that was all that mattered. The promise of a fresh start felt real here, in the simplicity of this place. She dressed in the clothes she had brought with her and, for the first time in a long time, felt ready to face the world outside. She made her way downstairs, the smell of breakfast wafting from the kitchen. The innkeeper, a woman named Margaret, greeted her with a smile. "Good morning," she said warmly. "I hope you slept well." Charlotte nodded, a soft smile curving her lips. "I did, thank you. Would you like some breakfast?" Margaret asked, gesturing to a small table set with bread, cheese, and fresh fruit. "I've got plenty." Charlotte hesitated for a moment, then nodded. She wasn't sure what her plans were for the day, but she felt the need to ground herself before venturing into the unknown. She sat at the table, The food simple but satisfying, and Margaret sat with her, filling the space with easy conversation. As they ate, Charlotte learned that Margaret had lived in the town her entire life. She had inherited the inn from her parents and had watched the town change over the years. The conversation flowed easily, and Charlotte found herself enjoying the warmth of the woman's presence. It felt familiar, comforting, like a small piece of the life she had once known. But the conversation also reminded her of the life she had left behind, and the realization made her heart heavy for just a moment. She didn't want to go back, but there were parts of her past that she couldn't forget. Margaret seemed to sense Charlotte's quiet reflection and didn't push. "The town's small, but it has its charm," she said after a pause. "I'm sure you'll find a place here if you're looking for one. People here don't ask too many questions. They let you be." Charlotte nodded, feeling the truth of the words in her bones. It was just what she needed. The idea of blending in, of finding a place where she could truly be herself without the weight of others' expectations, was exactly what she had been searching for. "Thank you," Charlotte said softly. Margaret smiled, a knowing look in her eyes. "You're welcome. Take your time. It's your life now." After breakfast, Charlotte stood, ready to take her first steps into this new life. She had no clear idea of what to expect, but she knew one thing for sure. She didn't have to have all the answers. For the first time, she was okay with the unknown. She was free to live without the confines of a predetermined path. As she left the inn and stepped into the morning light, Charlotte felt a sense of peace settle over her. The town was quiet, the streets filled with people going about their daily routines, but Charlotte didn't feel like an outsider. She felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The future, once so overwhelming, now seemed full of possibilities, and Charlotte was ready to embrace whatever came next. The town was alive with quiet energy that morning. Charlotte walked through the cobbled streets, her footsteps light, as she tried to take in everything around her. The air was crisp, the sun shining down on the small houses and shops, each one unique, painted in soft shades of blue, yellow, and red. She had no specific destination in mind, but the thought of exploring the town felt right. People passed by her with kind nods, a few even offering a friendly greeting. It was the sort of place where strangers could slip in unnoticed, where the weight of past mistakes could be left behind, if only for a while. As Charlotte strolled, she found herself stopping in front of a small bookstore. It was tucked away between two larger buildings, its windows lined with old books, their spines worn from years of being loved. She could see the faint glow of light through the cracks in the door. Something about it called to her. She stepped inside, the bell above the door ringing softly as she entered. The inside was just as she imagined, cozy, with the scent of paper and ink filling the air. Shelves lined every wall, stacked high with books on every subject imaginable. The atmosphere was calming, almost as if the books themselves had absorbed the stories of everyone who had ever read them. An elderly man stood behind the counter, his glasses perched on the edge of his nose as he flipped through a book. He looked up when he saw Charlotte and smiled. "Good morning," he said, his voice gentle. "How can I help you today?" Charlotte hesitated for a moment before responding. "I was just looking around," she said with a soft smile. The man nodded, his eyes twinkling behind his glasses. "Take your time," he said. "The stories here have a way of finding you when you're ready." Charlotte wandered through the aisles, her fingers trailing along the spines of the books. Each one seemed to whisper a story, a promise of something new. She picked up a small, leather-bound book, its cover soft to the touch, and flipped it open. The pages were yellowed with age, but the words inside were still vivid. She found a quiet corner near the back and began reading. The hours seemed to slip away as she lost herself in the pages. The book was about adventure, about discovering new places and new parts of oneself, about finding the courage to step into the unknown. Charlotte closed the book, a smile tugging at her lips. She realized then that the story she was reading wasn't so different from her own. She had come to this town with nothing but the hope of a new start, and now, she was beginning to see that the adventure wasn't just in the places she would go, but in the person she was becoming. As she stood up and returned the book to its place, the elderly man approached her. "Found something you like?" he asked, his voice warm. Charlotte nodded. "Yes," she said, her voice soft but filled with meaning. "I think I'm starting to understand what it means to begin again." The man smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. You'll find your way, in your own time, he said. The best stories always take a little longer to write. Charlotte left the bookstore with a sense of contentment she hadn't known she'd been searching for. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew she was ready to face it. The town felt more like home now, the quiet rhythm of life surrounding her. It was a place where she could breathe, where she could start fresh, and in that moment, Charlotte realized that she had already taken the first step toward the rest of her life. The next few weeks passed with a gentle rhythm Charlotte had never known. She found herself fitting into the town's slow pace more easily than she had expected. The people were kind, and their quiet lives offered a sense of comfort she had longed for. She spent her days helping Margaret at the inn, occasionally running errands for the local shopkeepers, and each evening, she found herself walking through the town square, watching the sun set over the hills in the distance. The town had a way of making her feel as though she truly belonged. It was a place where time seemed to stand still, allowing Charlotte to breathe in a way she hadn't been able to for years. It wasn't just the town that had changed her, though. Charlotte herself had grown. The scars from her past, once sharp and raw, had started to fade, replaced by a quiet strength she hadn't known she possessed. The fear that had once gripped her heart had begun to dissolve, replaced by a sense of possibility, a belief that she could create a life for herself from the ground up. One afternoon, as Charlotte was arranging flowers in the inn's small garden, a familiar face appeared at the gate. She looked up and found Samuel standing there, a slight smile on his face as he approached. "I thought I'd find you here," he said, his voice warm. Charlotte smiled back, feeling a sense of relief at seeing him again. "I didn't expect to see you so soon," she said. Samuel chuckled softly. "I suppose I'm not one to stay away for long. How have you been?" Charlotte wiped her hands on her apron and walked over to where he stood. "I've been good," she said. "Better than I ever thought I could be." Samuel nodded, his eyes searching her face for any sign of hesitation. "That's good to hear. I've been meaning to come and check on you. Make sure you're settling in all right." Charlotte laughed, the sound light and genuine. "You don't need to worry about me. I'm doing just fine. This town has been everything I needed, and more." Samuel looked pleased, but there was something else in his expression, something deeper. "I'm glad. You deserve to find peace, Charlotte." His words held more weight than she expected, and for a moment, Charlotte felt a wave of emotion rise in her chest. The past had hurt her, yes, but it had also led her here, to a place of healing, to a life that was truly hers. And for that, she was grateful. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I don't know what I would have done without your help." Samuel smiled gently. "You've done it all on your own, Charlotte. I've only been here to remind you that it's okay to take the next step." Charlotte nodded, feeling the truth in his words. She had made it this far by her own strength, and she knew now that she could continue to move forward. There was nothing to fear, no past to hold her back. The future was wide open, full of possibilities. As Samuel turned to leave, he paused at the gate and glanced back at her. "If you ever need anything," he said, his voice low and sincere, "you know where to find me." Charlotte smiled and nodded, feeling a sense of peace wash over her. "I know. Thank you, Samuel." She watched him walk away, feeling a quiet confidence settle in her heart. The life she had always dreamed of wasn't one of perfection, but it was hers. And that was more than enough. Weeks passed, and Charlotte found herself becoming more intertwined with the town's daily life. She had settled into a new rhythm, one that felt like it was truly her own. Margaret had continued to be a steady presence, and Charlotte had begun helping her more around the inn, running errands, and even assisting with the occasional guest. The work was simple, but it gave her a sense of purpose that she hadn't realized she was missing. The days were no longer filled with the heaviness of the past, but with small, fulfilling tasks that made her feel as though she was part of something bigger, something peaceful. One evening, after a long day, Charlotte sat on the porch of the inn, the warmth of the setting sun casting golden light over the quiet town. The air was still, and the faint sound of a distant dog barking echoed through the streets. She breathed in deeply, letting the calmness of the moment settle in her chest. This was the life she had always wanted but never thought she could have. A life free from expectations, from the promises made for her, and from the heavy weight of family obligations. She was no longer the girl promised to a duke, nor the sister caught in a painful rivalry. She was just Charlotte, nothing more, nothing less. The sound of footsteps approaching interrupted her thoughts, and Charlotte looked up to find Samuel walking down the path toward her. He had been visiting less frequently, but she knew he was still nearby, living his own quiet life. "Good evening," he said, his voice warm, as he approached. "Mind if I join you?" Charlotte smiled and patted the space beside her on the porch swing. "Of course," she said. Samuel sat down next to her, the familiar ease between them settling into the quiet. For a moment, neither of them spoke, content in the stillness. The evening light softened the edges of the world, and Charlotte felt a deep sense of gratitude for the peace that had found her here. Eventually, Samuel broke the silence. "How are you really doing?" he asked gently. Charlotte looked at him, surprised by the question but appreciating it all the same. "I'm good," she replied, her voice steady. "I didn't know what I was looking for when I came here, but now I know it's this. This peace. This simplicity. I feel like I can finally breathe." Samuel nodded thoughtfully. "I'm glad. You deserve it." Charlotte smiled, the words resonating in a way that she hadn't expected. She wasn't sure if he fully understood what he had just said, but to her, it felt like a reminder of all she had accomplished on her own. "I've learned a lot," Charlotte said, her voice quiet. "About myself. About life. It's not perfect, but it's mine. And I'm okay with that." Samuel looked at her for a long moment, his gaze soft and understanding. "You've come a long way," he said, his voice low. "And I think you're ready for whatever comes next." Charlotte took a deep breath, her eyes lifting to the horizon, where the last traces of sunlight were fading. "Whatever comes next," she echoed softly. For the first time, she felt no fear, no uncertainty. The road ahead was unknown, but she was ready to walk it, one step at a time. The past had shaped her, but it no longer controlled her. She was free, and that was all that mattered. As the evening settled into twilight, Charlotte knew that this chapter of her life wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The future was hers to create, and for the first time, she truly believed it.